And once again, thank you everyone for joining us today, whether you are here with us live or watching this recording afterwards. It's our pleasure to have the opportunity to introduce to all of you today one of our entrepreneurs in residence, Marianne Dunlop. Marianne's been an entrepreneur with us now for, I want to say, if not just over 2 years, around 3 years. I think originally we had you join us working with our accelerator program, and now Marianne really works with a lot of our companies when it comes to, as you can see from the slide, anything related to kind of human resources, recruitment, things that may potentially be more on the operational side of things. But I think a few of you have even had the opportunity to meet with Marianne before and realize that her skills and expertise also exist beyond that. And so again, it's our pleasure to have Marianne today walk through her workshop. We are recording this session and we will be sending out the slides to all of you afterwards as well. But Marianne, thank you so much again for taking some time today to sit down and chat with us. The floor is yours.
You're very welcome, Shane. Good morning, everyone. I guess it's noon hour, so good afternoon. So when I was asked to do this workshop, I think what was interesting about it is there's very traditional ways to do recruitment. So we can touch on those just slightly and I'll reference them. But one of the things I want to talk about today is a program and a system that you actually probably have right in your own back pocket that could be providing you an opportunity and a tool right in your own sort of toolbox to be used. We're going to talk just a little bit about what interviewing needs to look like, a little bit about doing reference checks and why they really should be done. And I'll talk a little bit about what you're thinking about as you start to put roles together. One of the things that I really focus on, and anybody who's done workshops with me before will find that this slide comes up over and over again. Because I think one of the really important things that has to happen when you start to think about recruiting is you sit back for a minute and you really take a look at what is it you want to achieve in typically the next sort of 6 months, 12 months, 18 months. So the first kind of piece there on the chart really starts to say, think about where you're going. And what I often do also think about is not only the practical operational aspects of this, but think a little strategically, because that will also start to get you thinking about what the role needs to look like, not only today, but say in that 12, 18-month time frame. The next thing you want to do is start to think about what are the skills and capabilities that you need to be successful in that time frame, and probably somebody who could grow beyond that with you. Startups, I think the thing that is always challenging is you almost intuitively always have to be thinking succession because you're changing all the time. So the person you bring in today, you want them to be able to grow with you if possible. So thinking about what the competencies are, one of the things I often do with people like yourself when I do my first meeting is I have them on a whiteboard really just tell me what are your key deliverables that you want to achieve over the next 12 to 18 months. Then I have you draw an org chart. And one of the reasons I do that is I want to see what you're visualizing as your competencies and what you need. And often when I do that, I start to see where you're gapped and what you actually need in order to achieve the goals that you've set. So those two pieces warrant a good amount of time to really think through when you're starting to plan what you need to do from a recruiting perspective. We're going to kind of jump back into recruiting. The rest of this slide really starts to talk about how do you properly develop and coach individuals and how do you kind of lead them forward, ensuring that your deliverables are met and performance is at the level that you require in order for them to be met. So the typical kind of way of looking at recruiting is really this little model here. It's about understanding what the position is, what the key deliverables are, and starting to put a recruiting plan together. So some of this, I think you still want to be cognizant of and be thinking about. And one of it is, what's the candidate pitch? Why should they come and work for you? So what is the opportunity? How will they be able to contribute and support you in your development and growth? And really thinking about how you're interfacing with these people, because the candidate experience does matter. And I think we've all had those experiences looking for jobs where you had great experiences as a candidate, and then you had the one where it was kind of like a black hole. They didn't know what happened. They didn't know if they were a good candidate, a bad candidate. They don't know what happened because they never heard back. So it's just thinking about what that looks like, because everyone who comes in contact with you potentially will have the opportunity at a later date to maybe refer a client back to you or an employee back to you. So always be aware that when you're interfacing in this way, there's always a networking opportunity for you as a startup. The other piece of this, which is always challenging, is how will you source for candidates? So has anybody on the call to date already started to go look for a candidate? Evan, can we take him off the speaker or off the mute for a moment? Evan, how did you go about it? What did you do?
Went online to Indeed as well as Job Bank and LinkedIn Jobs, and worked with an HR consultant to put together a good job description and responsibilities to share with them.
Okay, and did you find the candidate you needed?
Yes.
Okay, good. So those are often the common ways that people will go and look for candidates. There's no significant investment usually in those tools. Indeed, you can post fairly freely unless you want to sponsor the role. There are always angel lists and other opportunities available through the DMZ to kind of post your positions as well. One of the pieces that I started thinking about candidly back many, many years ago was, if you could do marketing campaigns and things like that, then why couldn't we do the same for recruiting? Because one of the things that I have found often as I've spoken to people like yourselves is one of the challenges in getting the right candidate is I don't have the network to get to the people I want to get to. I'm pinging people on LinkedIn, but they're not responding back to me. I've used Indeed. I get swamped with like 100 resumes, and like maybe 5 of them are actually people who are qualified to do my job. I'm using the angel list, but I don't have any money to do contingency search. And I don't know what to do anymore. And the market's tight, and then they want a lot of money. So I think these are all really natural things to be concerned about and things that are very real. And one of the reasons that this particular piece came about was in a conversation with startup founders. Those were the common problems. I need a cost-effective way. I need a way to get it, the candidates paying attention to me. I need to be able to convert. And then I think the other piece of this is there are times when you're going to be looking for candidates that you need one right now, but you know that in 6 months or 12 months, you may need 5 of them, or you might need 2 of them. So you want to be able to also start to think about how could you start to nurture those individuals, but use them at a later stage of your growth. So one of the things that I did several years ago when I actually worked in a technology company was I started sort of candidly in a meeting one day. I was listening to the marketing people in my company, and I was sort of like twiddling my fingers and all those wonderful things. And then all of a sudden it hit me, wait a minute, why am I not running recruiting campaigns? Why am I not using the technology I have to run campaigns? So I went to my recruiter, and then I grabbed my marketing operations person, and we went out to lunch that day. And on a napkin, similar to this, we started building out what could happen. And the interesting thing that day was that my marketing ops person had also been kind of asking the same question. So one of the things that I would propose to people like yourselves is that, if you're starting to feel a little frustrated with processes, what you may want to do is turn inward towards your marketing people and start to talk to them about how can you set up a marketing campaign that will allow you to go out and find individuals who could fit the positions that you have. And I would argue that when you're looking to set something up like this, it will be, roles that maybe will be repetitive for you. So developers, people like that, that may actually resonate, and the system can be used over and over again. Because any marketing person will tell you that, the interesting thing about digital marketing and running campaigns is the fact that you need to be able to figure out your keyword searches and things like that. So there is time that goes into this to set it up properly up front, and start to determine where do these individuals go to shop or look. What kinds of things are they paying attention to? How can you attach yourself to them? And good digital marketing people, if they use the same processes they do for being able to drive your marketing relative to conversion into sales for you, the processes are quite similar when it comes to recruiting. So this is one thing that I would propose when we start to think about what do you have in your own back pocket that you're already spending money on that you may be able to actually use to be able to set up recruiting processes to find people. So knowing that I'm not the marketing person, what I did do is took a little bit of time to talk to some marketing people to kind of quickly figure out what could that framework look like. So when you turn and you go to your marketing person, what are you saying to them? Because you can't just say, go and do a campaign for me. So, I think it's really starting to think about who is that audience. So one of the things with recruiters, if you've dealt with either contract recruiters or contingency search firms at all, often they'll talk to you about, okay, what does the candidate look like? So developing a persona. So what does that person look like? Who's your ideal candidate? You're defining the target audience. So by having that persona and that target audience defined, then they can start to build the marketing plans around that. They will be able to help you define the budget. So how much money are you spending to do the search? Depending on what you're looking for and what you need to do, you'll find that this will be significantly less money than it might be using other search channels. Understanding keywords. This is probably the one thing that whether it be you or your marketing people, it does take some time to do. So what I've done in the past is, for example, in one of my companies, I sat down with my developers that I actually wanted to model. And I said, okay, when you go online and you start to look for stuff, what are you looking for? And so we started having a conversation with them about what that looks like. And then the marketing person who sat in on that meeting with me, they also had kind of their questions were similar but different because they could then start to hone in and ask that deeper level question around what potentially the words were or the things that they could attach to. So that was sort of some work that we did, setting up for social media. Those are always really important, using your LinkedIn profile to get yourself out there. I remember one DMZ company that worked with LinkedIn. They were really cute because what they would do is a short video. And it was always something kind of goofy where they were like jumping or, doing something crazy so that, it drew your attention to them always. So every time they put something on LinkedIn, I always paid attention to them for no other reason than they always had action or something happening in their updates. So it's thinking about all those pieces that you guys already know in your own minds, but just thinking of interesting and creative ways to draw attention to yourself when you're using some of the social media pieces. in one of the cases, I remember them kind of just like, it was kind of like a jump for joy, like, yay, we were excited about blah. And then they sort of pitched their job. So just think about ways that you can creatively be using these things, because what I do know about technology and hiring in technology is technologists often want to be very forward thinking. They want to be not just they don't want to work in legacy situations. They want to work kind of in the moment going forward. They don't necessarily need bleeding edge technology, but they want to be leading edge. And when you can find creative marketing ways to pitch to them in places they go, they will pay attention to you. And then one of the other things that I did at a previous company was we started doing nurture campaigns. And that was to help build our pipeline. So one of the areas that I knew that we would be hiring on a recurring basis, because we had identified in our customer support area that would kind of be the entry point for us coming into the business as a customer support person, then being able to either go into customer success or go into project management or product management or go upstairs into the development area. So we kind of knew there were different areas, but we knew that was typically going to be one area. So we started writing just kind of learning pieces. So, and we put them out there in the universe on a regular basis. So it was about, picking up phone calls quickly. It was about technical information. It was about customer service. So we tried to find a lot of different ways to kind of nurture those relationships and kind of give them free information to help them develop their skills, but have them keep always coming back to us. So that was something we played around with, and I think something that can be done as well, internal to a marketing group. So I think, when I started to sort of, go back on this and keeping Shane in the back of my head there, because he always says, give them a process, give them a framework. I kind of put this together. So I think, it's really kind of being clear on what your business goals are, what is the type of people you want to be targeting, really thinking about those personas, thinking about the communities they belong to, where they may go. How can you find an entrance point into them? Developing budgets and channels with your marketing people, and really understanding some of the keyword search stuff, because it's not always the obvious stuff. Because I found sometimes, even for me, when I'm dealing with marketing people, the things they think I go and look for and the words they think I use are actually usually not the same thing. Sometimes they're actually very different, because I'm looking for the negative side of the world, not always the positive side of the world, because I'm trying to find information so that I can then, switch it around. So give this some thought. It's an area that I think you can easily start to integrate into your marketing frameworks as you grow your businesses. And as your marketing people get more familiar with working with this type of concept, I think you'll find that they'll be able to use their natural marketing campaign experience, capabilities, and apply it to this in a different way than what they previously have. The other thing that I learned a really long time ago from Christy Sadler, who was also an EIR with the DMZ at one point, it's also making sure that as you optimize your screens and your website for sales, be aware that there are ways to optimize for recruiting as well, and making sure that you come up in searches when people are starting to look for things. So again, your marketing people can be a real partner to you in coming out with new ways to go look and find people. I think the other piece of this, we're in a time today where we talk a lot about diversity and inclusion. We talk about it more from a cultural perspective as we do it. But I think the interesting thing that I have found, and this really goes back to my days working at HMV, was diversity was a strength of that business. And why was it a strength? Because it brought so many different ideas together that it really actually created some very interesting solutions and ideas for going forward. It also allowed us as a business to have a better understanding of the audience we actually sold to, because each individual who represented a group were able to influence our business and share information with us that actually made us stronger for who we were at the time. So I think, going back to probably my interest in roots in music, when you start to think of these three individuals on the screen, Kanye, Rihanna, and Paul, you wouldn't naturally put these three people together, but when you actually do, it creates a pretty good sound. And I think in business today, we can certainly find that by being open to good skills, capabilities, and bringing them together. I think in my first tech company, my big introduction to kind of a global business was finding skills that people had and bringing them in, and then suddenly realizing you had this huge global environment. So, we took advantage of that, particularly in our kitchen on a regular basis. So, hosting lunches and learning about the foods and the cultures and things like that. I think it kind of brings people together through that opportunity, but it also brings like minds together in their capabilities and skills as well. So there's a way to do this that I think can be very beneficial. The other thing we also find with those is that, when you are functioning in a diverse environment, there's a lot of studies out there that will also tell you your profitability as a business goes up as well. Interviewing, things to consider. So you've kind of gone through this new way of kind of looking at candidates. You started to find some candidates you want to speak to. I think being clear on your competencies when you walk into this kind of a process is important. So, for example, what I often do is I use an Excel spreadsheet. And so across the top of it, I will just simply put the key attributes that will be important in this role and the success of the individual. So recently, I've been looking for an operations person in a newly formed distribution companies. So knowing distribution, supply chain is going to be important. Because of the nature of this being a startup, they will also talk to the clients that they actually serve on a regular basis. They have to be a little technology oriented. They have to be results oriented. They have to be a builder. So it's really starting to think about what are those things that will be successful so that when you're going through your first interviews, and I repeat that first interview, you're starting to keep those kinds of things in mind. Do they have those key things that will be important to you? And it's very simple, things across the top, names on the left, and then it's a yes or no. I put notes to the far right, so I can add sort of that flavor that I want around the candidate or things that I may be missing. I often also tell candidates, you were selected because you presented your resume to me. Tell me what I don't know about you. So often what I've learned over the years of doing recruiting as well is people, I'll read a resume and I'll go, wow, this is a great candidate. Let's get them in. So you've read the resume. I don't need them to repeat what's in the resume. I just read it. But sometimes what happens is that person applied to your job because they saw fit. They saw a unique opportunity to work with you. So what I often do is I have them reflect on the job description, and then I have them verbally articulate how they see themselves contributing to that job based on the experiences they presented to me in their resume. So I don't have them repeat the resume, but I have them tell me their story. And what I have found over time is that often they will fill in little pockets of holes where I may have wanted a little bit more detail. So I ask open-ended questions, then I will go to closed-ended questions so that I have the opportunity to kind of ask the big question and then I bring it back into specific things I may need to know. So I do have them start out by doing that, and I kind of share a little bit of information about the company. I also want to make sure that they've done a little homework on me as well. So I often will start out with any questions about the company, any questions about the job description. And usually I find most candidates will want to kind of give you a little sense that they've done a bit of homework. So they'll tell you something that will let you know. If they haven't done any homework at all, I will go through the resume, or through the interview. But there's always that little lagging thing in the back of my mind as to, why didn't they do enough homework to really know what they've applied for or interviewing for? Towards the end of it, I will often ask them, so what makes you, why this job? Why now? And I leave it very open-ended because that's when I'm really trying to understand, particularly if I think they might be a good candidate for me. I still want to understand why they didn't do the homework, but I don't ask it directly. I ask it in another way. Take some time around that. The other thing is often I get asked the question, what questions should I ask? So I think it's really understanding, what your needs are and understanding what those are. So again, it goes back to the competencies. But when you get stuck, sometimes what happens for me is somebody will say something in an interview and it'll kind of make me go, that's interesting. And sometimes it's they haven't given me enough detail in answering a question, or they've prompted me to ask a question. So I use a model called PAR, P-A-R. And really the model is problem or situation, the action taken, the result or the outcome. So what I will do is I'll often say something like, so Shane, tell me a little bit about a time when you had to build something. Tell me what the situation was or the problem you wanted to address. What was the action you took? And what was the positive outcome on it? So I've now pointed him in the direction that I want him to tell me something about building. I want to know what he did, and I want to know what the positive outcome was. So I'm pointing him in the direction of the topic I want him to talk about, but I've given him a framework from which to tell me stuff back. So sometimes I'll have somebody say to me, well, does it have to be work related or not? That sometimes can be an indicator for you that they may not have had enough builder experience for your environment as a working thing, but I don't rule it out yet because I need to hear the story first, because I may actually find they've got a really good story and that they actually have been able to start something from scratch, be able to build something out that was impactful to the environment they were in and actually created the positive result for that situation. So I kind of use this as my fallback when I may not have planned a question or I want to ask a question to understand something a little bit better. The other time I use this quite a bit is when I've been interviewing someone who uses the word we, we did this, we did that, we. So there are some working environments, they very much work in a team environment. And so the culture is very oriented around the use of the word we. So when you actually ask them to give you a little bit more information on how they participated in a project, they actually can do it quite nicely. In some situations, you'll find that they have trouble telling you what I did. And that's what you want to be careful about. So that's another reason why I sometimes will use that question is I want to break them from the we answers. I want to know what they did. So I will sometimes say, so talk to me a little bit about your role in that situation. So I try to point them back to what was the action you took so that I can start to clarify their ability and what they actually did and how they supported it so that I'm having a good understanding of their skill set. Understanding what you can legally ask and discuss with a candidate. So, this is kind of always tricky because what I do find sometimes is people want to try and build relationship with the other person. So you're trying to be friendly, you're trying to be engaged. My advice is always try and keep it to skills, workplaces, things like that. If I sit and I say, hey, Jamie, tell me about your family, and he goes, well, I'm not comfortable with that, because I don't know you, and I don't want to tell you that, I have a child and I'm divorced and, my child lives in another country and I'm here and, all these things. So you always have to be very, very careful about, how you're trying to build friendships and relationships with the people that may work with you. And I get that your environments are small and that you really want to bring the team together. But I will promise you that even with the people on your teams today, you don't know everything about them. You know what they bring to your work environment. So you want to treat them professionally. You want to be thoughtful. And you certainly want to get a feel for who they are, but be careful about how intrusive you are with the questions you've asked of a stranger, because they're not a friend, and don't assume friendships or relationships until you actually have earned them. There will be a time you can learn more about the situation, but it won't be today in the interview. So just be careful of that. The other thing is don't also make assumptions about women. Not every woman is planning to have a child or thinking of having a certain lifestyle in a certain way. It's a mistake. So to ask questions that are assumptive of that would be a mistake as well. So be careful about, the questions you ask when you start to try to be friendly. Be thoughtful to the fact that you're building a team. And so team-based questions are always good. So, it's understanding, what was your last team about? What did you guys do together at work? What did you do outside? Just try and be more professional about it, because you are the boss and they will take cues from you around the business and the experience they're having. So just be thoughtful of that. If you're not sure, ask. And when I say ask, don't ask them, ask somebody else. Get to myself, Shane, or someone and ask, does this seem appropriate as a question? And then I think it's understanding why you want to ask the question sometimes. This next one, in a startup environment, you want candidates who can be adaptable, who can adapt to changes, and be a builder. People who need a lot of structure and process, they get challenged in startups. So here's the problem I've seen at times. Individuals being hired from a company that, either is a competitor or a larger business where you hope that they can bring their skills and experiences into yours and be able to build those same things out for you. Just be sure that they can. In my very first tech company, we hired an individual into a sales role, and he was very, very talented. The problem was he had never built the sales processes in the company he worked. He had followed them, but never built them. And he didn't know how to scale them back for a smaller environment. So you also want to understand, people's ability to adapt. And again, sometimes it is, tell me about a time when you've been in an environment where there was a lot of change and a lot of flux. Were you comfortable with it? How did you deal with it? And what was the outcome? Tell me your story again. So you really want to understand that, because that's another place where people get frustrated or people need too much detail around work that they're being asked to do that you don't have because you're just simply not there yet. So be aware of that. And also be aware of the fact that during an interview, the candidate is also assessing you. This is really important. I've seen a lot of inexperienced managers go into, I need to know about you, Shane. Tell me about you, and they forget the fact that this individual is also assessing you. So when you're late for an interview, when you don't show up for an interview, when you are short or distracted or taking phone calls during an interview, those are all disrespectful things. And they teach that individual that that's what it will look like to work for your company. So just be aware of how you're presenting. Interviews are about getting to know the individual and how they would fit in your team. Can they do the work? You're starting to build relationship a little bit with them by learning about the last work environments they've been in, how they are aligned to the one that you're building. You're also tipping your hand as to the culture you're building at your company by the people you hire and how you treat them during an interview process. So take the time to think it through and what you need to do, because these things will all reflect on you and your processes. And believe me, people talk. As much as we say we don't want people talking, well, they talk. So you want to be the company and you want to be the startup that people like to go and interview for, because it is respectful. They learn a lot about your company, about you, you learn about them. And the whole concept of team and building team is at the center of it. It's having people who fit, and it's also have people who are capable of doing the work collaboratively. So how many are doing reference checks? I don't see very many hands right now. Yeah, okay. And so why do people not do references? Let me share with you the number of excuses I've heard. We need the person really quickly. We didn't have time. They have overseas references. I didn't know how to get a hold of them. I do a lot of reference checking these days by email. And I do it that way often because I have found that time is a problem. When people don't know who I am and I'm trying to get a hold of them, it takes up more of my time to do it that way. By phone, they don't know who's really calling them. I don't catch them at the right time. I'm spinning a lot of wheels to get it done. So I started putting a small little email together that will go out to the individuals. And I really quickly frame out these key areas. So I use this model every time I do reference checks. And it's really about understanding, can they technically do the job? So whether they're in a developer, they're in HR, they're an accountant, they're marketing, whoever they are, I want to know that they can do the job as it is defined. So these words will shift slightly in these areas, but essentially you want to know they have the technical capabilities to do the job. The other piece is the interpersonal skills piece. That starts to be about leadership, about interpersonal collaboration, working with others, communicating, all of those pieces. Results orientation. What you want are individuals who know they've got to get it done. And particularly for your organizations. I don't have the ability to sort of play in an academic environment where I can noodle things around for lengths of time. And there is no boundary to how long I take in these situations sometimes. So you want to understand that as well. Operating style. And then, the typical question is, would you rehire or work with them again? My last question, my manager coaching tip, I candidly stole from one of my CEOs many years ago. He always asked this question. I thought it was a great one. So instead of saying what were their strengths and weaknesses, what I actually do is I ask the interviewer, do you have a coaching tip? And what it starts to do is give you some sense of how this person functions. I would say the number one thing I hear in this area over and over again is typically the individual will not want to be micromanaged. So it's understanding what that looks like. So it's, if you see higher up that they're a self-starter, they're well organized, they manage effectively, they get the results you want, then that probably lines up quite nicely for you as a reference framework and what the patterns look like. If I see somebody who's disorganized, they do miss deadlines, things like that, and then I see they don't like to be micromanaged, I probably want to understand that a little bit more. So I may sometimes even go back with the individual or I make sure that the manager who this person will be reporting to knows that there have been some concerns about these areas, and that although they may not like to be micromanaged, they might want to spend a bit more time with them in the onboarding and orientation side of things until they know they're really settled and they have a pattern in the working environment. Different work environments produce different results for the same individual. So it may not necessarily be your experience at the end, but take the words and pay attention to them as you help to orient that person. Sometimes I will even ask individuals, I understand you may not like being micromanaged. So tell me what's the best way to manage you for the best results out of you. So you're starting to ask them a few questions. And what I will sometimes do is allude to those areas like, okay, if I want to keep you on schedule, am I giving you reminders? How am I doing that? I need things to be on deadline. So I'm trying to understand their style. And one of my companies, I had one individual on my team who always sounded quite negative. And the reality was she needed more detail. And as we started to really understand each other, because I spoke quite conceptually, she and I started to come to an agreement on how I shared information with her so that she always understood her work. And I also understood the questions she needed to ask in order to be effective. And she was very, very good. She managed benefits, which is very detailed, has a lot of deadlines, and has a whole customer service dynamic to it. So, that was important. So, I think what I'm trying to introduce here are just some things to consider as you're doing it. Again, open and closed questions will help you get clarity around information. Be aware that when you're doing references and depending, so I will tell you, professional services, 99% of the time, if you try to talk to anybody in that area of a business, they will not talk to you until the evening or first thing in the morning. And depending on how much travel they do, they'll sometimes take a late night call, or they'll take a very early morning call. I would say people in development areas, managers, they're pretty routine. So I always found 8:30 was always seemed to be a good time. Those people would always talk to me if I needed to talk to them. Marketing people are all over the place. Salespeople are all over the place. And that's probably because they have more flexibility to their schedule and how they work. So there's lots of different ways, but just be aware that this isn't always a 9 to 5 ability. And often, whether you send them out or you try and phone people, it will take you at least a day, and it's well worth the time investment to make sure you understand who this candidate is. The other piece of this is I like to see managers as references, so people who can actually speak to their work. If they are cross-functional peers, I often will take those as well, depending on what the role is, but I want people who can speak to the work. So it's not my friend, it's not my lawyer, it's not my banker, it's people who could speak to my work. So, having said all of that today, people, if you have any questions, I'm happy to address them. In the meantime, if you're determining roles, if you're determining roles that you need or the level of role that you may be considering, and when I say level, sometimes we overhire at this level. We think everybody's got to be a C-level person when they can be a director, VP, managers, because there is a framework around some of this and the work that is typically expected in those roles. If you want to talk further about interviewing, about marketing, recruiting marketing, or even onboarding in the first 6 months, happy to do that with any of you or any other specific HR employee related items. Probably very little that I haven't heard before. If there's an employee issue, most things I've had experience over the last 25 years. Any questions?
Awesome. Thanks, Marianne. And I think like I normally say, anyone feel free to jump in or throw it in the chat. But just a question that I know comes up quite a bit, especially at the DMZ, is how should founders look at students, co-ops, and interns, just because that is a little bit different than, say, hiring a full-time individual. And oftentimes I think a lot of startups love to hire, especially students or co-ops, because it's subsidized. But how would you really encourage everyone here to look at, bringing on their first student or intern?
I think that what I've learned in this area is that typically there is a high expectation of what these students are capable of doing. What you have to remind yourself, if you take yourself back to your own education, we learned a lot of theory in universities and colleges, and we learned how things should be. What we did not learn is what it practically and realistically looked like in a work environment. So what you need to be aware of is that you are inviting a student to come and work with you who will have read the books, they will have taken the courses, they will have written the exam. But now they're coming into your organization, with the preconceived idea that this is how everything needs to happen. And that is not always the case. So what you're really doing when you bring a student in is you're giving them a hands-on, realistic, practical experience on how those things will apply in the real world. So be aware that that's what you're doing. The other thing is that if you actually need an individual who's done it before, unless you sort of specify in that job outline that you are looking for students at a higher level of education who have already done other working internships and maybe have done it before, or an alumni from that school who's done it before, you will not necessarily get those skills from an entry-level student applying for an internship. This is a learning opportunity for them as much as it is a work opportunity for you. To hire someone and do some work. So be considerate to the fact that these people will need some orientation. So if you don't have kind of an onboarding plan, then you probably need one. And you should probably work with the school on any educational things that they have to take away from a practical work experience and also from their kind of educational component of it. So be aware of any commitments that are there. The other piece of this is that I would always strongly suggest that you put a buddy with the student so that they're actually connected to somebody who may be able to provide just a little bit of mentoring. So in these cases where you have somebody who maybe isn't a manager today and you have no intentions of needing a manager today, but maybe they're a senior person in an area or they're a team lead, this is an opportunity to kind of start to develop them as well by partnering them with the student and giving appropriate work. So complex works, hard work, things that have to happen stay at the top. And this person can help them with some of the mid-level or junior stuff and then help to ease it up when they feel a candidate is ready. Does that answer the question, Shane? Okay.
Hi, I had a question. So while we're talking about employee onboarding, how successful is, let's say, outsourcing part of your work, either software development or marketing, just to keep flexibility from a startup point of view? I don't know if you have any data or any anecdotes around does outsourcing work for a startup?
So I think you have to really take a look at your internal systems when you start to consider outsourcing. So I think in environments where you are very linked technology-wise and kind of in concepts of remote working, where you can collaborate easily with the tools that you have in your business. You can communicate back and forth easily. There's a good chance that it can work for you because you really want to make sure that they're integrated into your business as part of your team. So there's two things here. It has been my experience that when you are looking at repetitive work, so perhaps it's testing or things like that, being able to outsource it and having it in a different time zone may work, not badly, if you can set up the repetitive nature of the testing or the work that they need to do. You need to make sure that whoever is managing them is aligned to your team very tightly and that they are taking the direction from your team. The second part of this is if you are hiring resources that are international at a more seasoned capability, so developers in other parts of the world where they have the skill and capabilities, again, you may be able to delegate some of that more complex development work, but keep in mind, they still have to report to the same person on your team. Even though they work in a different time zone, make sure they're reporting into whoever owns your architecture or the broader strategy or systems of what you're doing. You need to be able to ensure regular contact and communications. So, be aware that if your systems are not set up well, or your team is not broad enough to be able to interact to other time zones, there may be challenges in the work. And there's got to be a real trust between you as an organization and that third party. You kind of got to function together really tightly. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. Thank you. Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about it, but still have to formulate the strategy around this. Definitely one of the options we're exploring.
Yeah, there's a lot of different resources out there. I would say, one of the big things is making sure the plan, the plan is the plan for everyone, and they know their piece in the whole, and making sure that whoever manages that group is aligned and communicates with you guys on a regular basis, and that there is a conversation. I think one of my biggest concerns or challenges that I hear often is, somebody will go, blah, 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 we hired, and I never hear from them, and then I'll go, did you call them? Did you ping them? Do you have a regular scrum with them? So communications is really important, because if you don't find some way to kind of integrate them into who you are, they will go off on their own, because that's who, that's where they are located. So, again, it's making sure that that group is kind of included. So there may be one time, once a week or once every 2 weeks. One of my companies, when I was in a technology company, my tech leader had 3 different development groups, and they were in 3 different, they were here, but there were 2 others that were in other countries. So once every 2 weeks, he had a scrum meeting where he tried to find a common time zone option for everybody to go into. So I think it was like at 5:30 at night or something. It was some odd time at night. And he would have everybody on that call once every 2 weeks. Then he would continue to communicate with the others, separately through the other couple of times through the weeks until that meeting. But he always liked to have at least everybody on a common call. And then he would be very clear about his messaging where he needed to be from a strategic perspective. So often that common call was around the broader strategy pieces. And then the other meetings he had more independent or more operational focused or specific to things that those groups were working on.
Thank you.
Perfect. And I know we've only got about 5 minutes left. So maybe the last question we'll leave you with before we wrap up is, when should everyone here start looking at an ESOP and starting to carve out equity for early employees in their company?
When you can afford it. I think getting your feet kind of underneath you a little bit as a business, I think is important. And it isn't going to be the answer for hiring always. So, I've had that conversation a lot where can I just give equity? Depending on who you are employed and what the situation is, you will find that you're not going to get around cash compensation pieces. So just be aware of that. Candidly, in Ontario, you would not be able to do that unless they were part of your founder group. So I always feel you want to get a little time under you. Likely you're starting to establish relationships with BCs and other people. It doesn't necessarily mean that is the case, but know that your business is grounded before you start giving your equity away. And then take the time to understand what that looks like as you evolve and grow. and that you've aligned your percentages appropriately to the roles and the individuals. By the way, equity today in the tech industry, for some, will still have high value as a compensation option. There is the hope of equity and growth. There will be some that you will talk to who have had the experience of having successful exits. And then there will some that it's an urban legend. I've never seen it. I don't know anybody, and I don't believe it'll ever happen. So just be thoughtful that once you kind of have an established business, and I would say, be at least, Shane, I'm going to say, be in the millions at least before you start to give away your equity.
John, I saw you raise a hand. If it's a very quick question, just before we wrap up, we can get to it.
Do you find that when you start to talk about giving away equity, it's kind of that fine balance of, somebody's looking to get 100K in salary, they give away some of that salary to get some equity as part of getting a position. So, just come to that negotiation standpoint from that.
Yeah, for sure. That's that does happen, where individuals will say, well, if you give me equity and you give me 5% or you give me 10%. The problem I have sometimes is founders don't even understand what they just gave away when they give away 10%. And they don't realize that in most other environments, that person would never have got 10%. They might have got 1%. And so it becomes a challenge if done too early and you don't understand really your true value of your business and what equity looks like for you and your business, how it could potentially grow. I think people work off the aspirations of what they have heard in the marketplace of what it could be without doing the homework. And I think you got to do the homework before you start giving your equity away. And oh, by the way, the question I like to ask when I start to have that equity $100,000 pay thing, what does retention look like? Do these people actually stay? Because sometimes what happens is they think this is going to be a quick turnaround and they're going to get a chunk of money, and it won't happen that way. So they've got to be in it for the long haul. This is deferred income, deferred.
Yep.
It's not immediate. So they need to understand that. Yeah, and they need to understand that because sometimes people think this is a quick turnaround and it isn't. So you hire someone, you don't get all that you wanted out of them. They leave, they haven't made money, and candidly, it's not always a win-win doing it that way.
And I think with that definitely leaves us with some food for thought. And I think just as we're wrapping up this conversation, I know, Marianne, you and I were talking just before that you have availability for everyone if they want to book a follow-up meeting with you on Tuesdays. I think the only days that you mentioned you aren't able to do are Monday and Thursday. And so if Tuesday, for whatever reason, doesn't work, let us know and we can look to hopefully find some time to get you some time with Marianne as you're starting to go through the hiring process and anything else kind of related to it. So again, Marianne, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon.